And I think we should do that always, not just one day of the year. On the other hand, I know that there are a lot of people that are sitting here this morning, like myself, who are spending the first Mother's Day without your mother. I know there are some who were married to a great woman for many years, and this day is clouded in darkness to some degree because you lost your wife, and you're dealing with that on this day. I know the children in those cases are also dealing with the loss of their mother. And so this has always been a struggle to me. What do you do on Mother's Day? And I'm kind of bailed out by the fact that we've been involved in a series called Spiritual Mythbusters. And this morning we continue that series by looking at one of the myths that lingers in church and in society, and that is that if you raise your child in a godly home, it guarantees that they will always be faithful. And I think there are a lot of mothers and fathers out there that are dealing with unnecessary guilt. They raised their child in a godly home, but as their child grew to adulthood, they chose a different path, a path of disobedience, a path away from God. And now the parents struggle and ask the question constantly, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? You know, I think all of us have probably been in a situation where we're in a public setting somewhere, maybe in the mall or in a restaurant, and we watched 2- and 3-year-old children absolutely running amok, acting like spoiled brats. And maybe you've made the assessment in your mind, well, those parents, they need to learn a few lessons about parenting. Or maybe you've said to yourself, give me that kid for 5 minutes, and I'll take care of it, right? I'll beat it out of them. Or maybe we assess a situation where the children have grown into adulthood, and they're dealing with alcoholism or drug abuse. Maybe they've wound up in prison, and we judge the situation by looking at their parents and saying, you know, they must have done something wrong. They must not have done it all right, or else their children wouldn't be in that situation, because after all, the Bible teaches, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it, right? But is that exactly what Proverbs 22:6 is stating? I'm here to tell you this morning, not exactly. It's not an ironclad absolute truth. And that's where I want us to head this morning. If I raise my child in a godly home, then he or she will never fall away. That's what we think Proverbs 22:6 states. And even if they do fall away, they're going to eventually come back. They're going to remember their raising, and they're going to return, which would imply that if a child does stray from their godly raising, and they don't return, then the parent must have done something wrong. The parent must have made a mistake somewhere, because their children would come back if they were raised correctly, or they never would have fallen away in the first place. My friends, there are books that teach this principle. There are blogs and magazine articles that support this principle. There are preachers that will teach and preach this as an absolute truth. Listen to the words of one writer. If our parents' approach seemed close to biblical parenting, yet bore bad fruit, we can be certain it was not biblical. Parents who accurately implement biblical principles will not be disappointed. Here's another. This is another expert who advises parents to, and I quote, observe and learn from winning parents whose children are obedient and respectful and who know God's will and live faithful Christian lives. We should be imitating those parents who are successful, not those who fail. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? Well, that's because it is. Raising our children in a godly home does not ensure their eternal security. Proverbs 22:6 does not teach this, and we know that reality doesn't support it. The real world experience doesn't support it. Sadly, not all godly children will grow into godly adults. That's just the truth. Every person has been endowed with a great gift from God. It is the gift of free will. And while our children at home, we have great influence on them, but as they grow into adulthood and as they leave the home, our influence becomes less and less. They make their own choices. And unfortunately, they can choose to not be obedient to God and to the raising that their mother and father gave them. Godly parents are responsible for raising their children in a godly home. There's no question about that. But once their children have grown into adulthood, their children become responsible for their own choices. And they cannot point the finger back at their parents, nor can we. If they were raised in a godly home and they make bad choices, that's on them. The burden is on them to do the right thing. How can we merely look at a wayward child and assume that their parents messed up? That's a judgment I think we need to stop making. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 1 and verse 2, it reads, "Listen, O heavens, and hear, O earth, for the Lord speaks. Sons I have reared and brought up, but they have revolted against me." So many times in the Old Testament we see that God referred to himself as the Father and Israel as his children, and yet they revolted, they turned from him. Dare we say that God was a failure as a parent? Certainly not. Israel made bad choices. They turned away from God. That was their choice, and God wasn't to blame. Here's something that needs to be understood before we go any further. Proverbs are not promises. Proverbs 22 and 6 was never meant to be a guarantee. Proverbs set forth general truths. They are principles. They are profound. They are designed to instruct us on the best way to live. There's no question about that. They're vital to our well-being, but they are not ironclad rules that were never meant to be broken. Allow me to point out another proverb. This one's found in chapter 16 and verse 7. It reads, "When a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him." Now, is this a promise? Will this always prove true? And the answer is no, it won't. This is a general truth indicating that when a person lives a righteous life, characterized by high moral standards, when that person has a loving attitude toward his fellow man, when one lives in this way, it's going to attract others to him, even his enemies. And thus, he will attain a more peaceful environment. However, this is not an absolute truth. Some people are evil. No matter how kind we are to them, our kindness cannot penetrate their hardened and callous heart. Did Christ's ways always please God? Yes. But did it always bring peace from his enemies? Well, absolutely not. In fact, he was crucified for what he stated, what he taught, what he believed, and what he preached to others. This doesn't negate the principle. It's still a great principle to live by, and we shouldn't ignore it. But it doesn't guarantee that we will be at peace with our enemies, or that we'll have a peaceable environment. It's still a great principle, just like raising godly children is a great principle, and one that we should seek to live out. Setting our children on the path of righteousness is the proper thing to do, even if they turn away later in life. Although Proverbs are not promises, they are still beneficial because they are godly maxims to guide our conduct. Even though raising your child in a godly home will not necessarily guarantee that they will remain faithful into adulthood, it's still the best way to train a child. And the Bible tells us, commands us, that we are to raise our children in a godly home, that we are to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And we could go back to Deuteronomy 6. We could look at Ephesians 6, as we will in just a moment. But absolutely, God expects parents to pass along their faith. He expects us to start a chain of faithfulness. If one wasn't started by our parents, then we are to start one in our homes, and we are to continue that multi-generational faithfulness. And we are to pass down our faith so that they'll pass it down to their children and pass it down to their children, and so on and so forth. But my friends, rebellion occurs even in the most ideal environments. Think about the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve had the perfect environment. It was absolutely ideal. Their abode could not have been more perfect. There was perfect self-esteem, there were perfect relationships, there were perfect surroundings, and yet they were disobedient. They rebelled. The devil has influence, but he didn't force Adam and Eve to partake of that fruit. He didn't shove it in their mouth and make them partake of it. They made a choice, right? And today we have teachers, we have coaches, we have peers that exert a tremendous amount of influence on our children, but they don't control them. They don't make decisions for them. You see, we must train our children now. We must place them on the path of righteousness while they are young. We must make passing down a living faith a priority while they're under our roof, so that when they begin life on their own, that faith is so ingrained within them that they don't know any different and they don't want to seek anything different. We need to instill a living faith within them and pray that once they leave our home, they will be faithful unto death. Another problem in understanding this proverb stems from the fact that we don't even read it correctly to begin with. When did depart become return? That's how we read it, right? That if we train up a child in the way he should go, when he is old, he won't depart from it. And we think that even if he does depart, that he'll return someday if he was raised in a godly home. Where does it say that? It doesn't say anything about departing. In fact, it says that they won't depart in the first place. So we don't even read it correctly. It should also be pointed out that train conveys the idea of dedication, whether of a person or a thing, to the service of God. So in the context of Proverbs 22:6, it would have to do with the parents' mental resolution to train and guide their children toward eventual service on behalf of their Creator. Take special note of the fact that it reads, train up a child in the way he should go. You're going to find that most scholars are somewhat conflicted on the meaning of this phrase. Some suggest that what is being alluded to here is the wise parents will not only train their child in divine truth, but will also train them consistent with the child's unique personality. Albert Barnes stated it this way. He said, in the way he should go indicates according to the tenor of his way, i.e., the path especially belonging to, especially fitted for, the individual's character. So in that case, Proverbs 22:6 seems to be saying that when godly parents resolve to raise their children for service to God, and when that training is done in harmony with the child's personality, then it will generally prove to be the case that they will remain faithful. I don't know about all of that, but what I do know is this, that we are to raise our children in a godly home. You cannot deny that fact. That is pointed out in the Bible over and over again. Some people see faith as something personal. I can remember having supper one time in Missouri with a lovely couple that I was trying to reach, trying to get them to come to church, and they had a son my son's age, and they were talking about faith, and they said, that's up to him. That's a personal decision. We can't step in and affect that in any way. And I said, no, you're supposed to affect that. It's your job. You're supposed to pass down faith. It is your job to train your child in a godly home, to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But given that, if we do that, there is a possibility that they will turn from that raising. And so many times we deal with the guilt of that. And we bear an unnecessary burden sometimes, although I think we're always going to bear a burden if our child is unfaithful into adulthood. But so many times we want to blame ourselves when that's not necessarily always the case. I've looked into the eyes of many parents who were dealing with this guilt, who wondered, where did I go wrong? What did I do? I thought I was doing everything right. I felt like I was teaching them God's Word and that I was living it out in my daily life so as to show them what it meant to be faithful. And for so long they were. They led singing as a child. They would, as a teenager, they would give lessons and devotionals. We were at church all the time. And what did I do wrong? And sometimes it's simply the fact that you didn't do anything wrong, the child did. And you're bearing this unnecessary guilt. I remember when I was coaching, there was this lady that was, unfortunately, her husband had left her with a small child. He was 3 years old. And they would come every day to the gym to wait on her other child to get done with practice. And this little 3-year-old boy is the cutest thing you ever seen. Cussed like a sailor. And everybody thought it was hilarious. The kids thought it was hilarious. Mom thought it was hilarious. He was the entertainment for everybody. Get him to say this, get him to say that. And I was appalled. Well, guess what? That child is 20 years old now, and it's not so funny anymore. He's been in trouble with the law. He was expelled from school. They do grow up. And what we train and teach them, or what we allow them to get by with even at a young age, can come back to haunt us. Are there some parents who are dealing with guilt because they did not raise their child in a godly home? Yes, absolutely. Some did not put the emphasis on raising their children in a godly home. They did not put the correct emphasis on God and faith, and they're paying the consequences for that when they look at their children. Yes, that is true. But there are a whole host of folks who are blaming themselves for the actions of their children. Though they raise them in a godly home, their children are acting ungodly in every way. We talk often about the responsibility of parents. Mainly, we beat up the dads and talk about them being the spiritual head of the household, which is absolutely biblical and absolutely correct. But so often, at least when I was growing up, I'd go to church and I'd hear Mother's Day sermons and Father's Day sermons that were not all that encouraging. In fact, they were pointing out everything that mom and dad were doing wrong. And, we talk a lot about the responsibility of parents, as I think we should, maybe more so in a more encouraging way, perhaps. But, we seldom talk about the responsibility of the children. You realize that children have a biblical responsibility as well? Listen to what is written in Ephesians 6, 1 through 3. Paul writes, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord." Not a suggestion, that's a command. "Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth." Children have a God-given responsibility to obey their parents, to honor their mother and their father. In fact, in the Old Testament, if they rebelled, what happened to them? They were stoned to death. And obviously, we don't do that today. At least we shouldn't, right? You honor your father and mother by obeying them. The word obey in that passage means to listen, to attend, to submit. And this is a great challenge. I know, I've been there. It's a great challenge as a teen to listen, to attend, and to submit. Because as a teenager, the last thing I wanted to do was to submit to authority. I didn't want to listen to my parents because I felt that they were old-fashioned, that they were out of touch, that they had no idea what I was dealing with and what I was going through. But none of those disclaimers are here. You still have to honor your mother and your father. You are to obey your mother and your father. Honor in this passage is the word timeo in Greek, and it refers to valuing. So when children honor their parents, they're not simply following what their parents teach them. They are valuing what their parents taught them. They are taking it to heart. They are applying it to their lives. They are showing their father and their mother just how much they mean to them, how appreciative and how thankful they are for raising them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. As any parent knows, it's not an easy job to raise children. It takes hours and hours of self-sacrifice and time and energy. It's stressful, it's anxiety-ridden, and as children, we need not to forget the cost of parenthood, what it has cost our parents to bring us to this point and even further. We should always honor, value our mothers and our fathers. Paul's letter to the Ephesians is not the first time that we read the divine command for children to honor and obey. As part of the Ten Commandments, we know that it says, "Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you." You realize the Ten Commandments are both vertical and horizontal, right? The first four deal with our relationship to God, right? Don't have any other idols. Worship God first and foremost in your life. All of those things come from a horizontal relationship. A vertical relationship. It's about our relationship with God. But the next six deal with a horizontal relationship. In other words, a man-to-man relationship, a relationship with other human beings. And notice before, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not commit murder. What's the first one? To honor your mother and your father. Before all those things, honor them. Why? Because God understood that it begins in the home. That's where it's got to take place. Again, read Deuteronomy 6 and you see that. It needs to be written on their hearts. And once they understand honoring their father and their mother, well, then it's very likely they're not going to commit adultery or kill or steal or all those other things. God knew what He was doing when He set this forth. There is one caveat to all this, and that is that our first allegiance is to God. As children, as adults, our first allegiance is to God. And so, children are not under obligation to honor a father or a mother who is ungodly, or who is teaching them ungodly things, or leading them down an ungodly path. Because our first loyalty is to God, He is the one we serve first and foremost. If mom and dad are not reiterating what God has taught through His holy word, then we are not under obligation to honor or value that. So as a teenager, as you grow into adulthood and as you get older and you're able to discern that, while you are to honor in a sense that you honor the relationship with your father and mother, that they are indeed your father and mother, you don't succumb to those teachings that will lead you away from God. God doesn't expect you to be faithful to unfaithful teachings, but rather to be faithful to the Word of God, right? That is the one exception here that we should mention. But I want you to notice something else in Ephesians 6, 1 through 3. Notice that there is no time limit. If you notice that, parents who raise their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord are to be honored for a lifetime. And not just for the life of the parents, but even after they're gone. If they raised you correctly, you honor that raising even after they have left this earth. There is no time limit here. It doesn't say to honor them while they're alive. It doesn't say to honor them until you reach 25 years of age and then you're on your own. It says to honor your father and your mother. So if they raised you in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, you honor that even after they're gone. What better way to honor your parents than by living a godly life? By taking what they taught you, building upon it, and seeking to pass it down to your children and being a godly influence for them. I can remember living in Batesville, Arkansas, working with the North Heights congregation. There was a sweet older lady in the congregation named Sharon, and Sharon was dealing with stomach cancer that had spread. And in all my years of ministry, that's got to be one of the worst scenes that I've ever experienced, being by her bedside as she breathed her last breath, because leading up to that moment, it was very painful. It was suffering like I had never seen. She was in a lot of pain and suffering. But while she was able to still speak and was still coherent, she told her son, I want you to get back in church. You were raised right. Get back to church. And he was raised in a godly home. I think everyone's assessment was the same, that they raised their children correctly, but he had turned away. And he had married a woman who was not going to church either. And so she said, I want you to promise me that you'll take her to church, that you'll get back to doing what you know is right. And he did. He made that commitment. He recommitted his life, and his wife became a Christian. We baptized her not long after that. They were committed because they saw their mother dying there on that bed. And they listened to her as she taught them one last time, you know what's right. Get back to doing it. You know, the influence of our parents can be so powerful. And yet we get out on our own and we start making decisions that kind of take us away from God, and before we know it, we find ourselves adrift. We find ourselves sailing away from God, and sometimes it takes something like that to turn us back around. I don't know what it's going to take to turn you around this morning, but I sure hope that if you're raised in a godly home, that you're going to seek to live a godly life, to honor your father and mother and the teaching that they raised you with. And if you're not a child of God, and that you're not raising your children in a godly home, that you'll start that chain of faith today. I'm not done. What are you doing? Mark Twain once said, when I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned in 7 years. And I think all of us as children probably have thought the same thing at one time or another. God knew what He was doing, and He knew that young people need the godly direction and guidance of their parents. He knows that no matter how wise young people may think they are, they fail on their own without the godly instruction of their parents. You see, the parent-child responsibility, or I should say the parent-child relationship, mirrors a God-man relationship, or at least it should. Parents will typically get their idea of what a God-man relationship looks like. Children will typically get that from their parents, namely their father. A group of expectant fathers were sitting in a waiting room, and their wives were in labor. And these fathers were gathered around waiting for the news, and a nurse comes out and tells one of them, "Congratulations, your wife just gave birth to twins." And he said, "Wow, that's a coincidence. I play for the Minnesota Twins." A little bit later, a nurse comes out and says, "Congratulations, your wife had triplets." And the man said, "Wow, that's astonishing. I work for 3M." And at that, one of the expectant fathers fell to the ground and began weeping bitterly. And one of the other fathers said, "What's the matter? Are you sick?" And he said, "No, I work for 7-Up." Let's face it, raising a child is difficult. Raising children is hard, especially if you have multiple children. But as parents and children, you need to understand this. As parents, we've never done this before either. We're new to this. I've never raised a teenager until I got teenagers. Before that, I'd never really changed any diapers. I'd never really, fed my child a bottle. I mean, this was all new territory and new ground, and it still is. Each day is new for me, just as it's new for you as well. And I hope, young people, that you will take that to heart and understand that your parents just have your best interest in mind. They truly have your best interest at heart. And we've got a great group of young people, don't we? I mean, what wonderful young people we have. And that's a testament to their parents. We have great parents here. But you know what? I didn't grow up in a godly home. And so what I decided long ago is, you know what? I'm going to start my chain of faith right here. And maybe you're in that position. Maybe you didn't grow up in a godly home. It's not too late to start that multi-generational faithfulness that we talked about. Start today. Start making that a priority in your home and raising godly children so that they'll grow into godly adults. Why do you think Exodus 20:12 reads, "Honor your father and your mother that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you." Or Ephesians 6, "So that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth." This is not promising that you'll live to be 100 years old if you'll obey your parents, but rather that you'll enjoy that eternal security, that you'll live a good life here on earth, but also that you'll enjoy that eternal security that comes afterwards. There's a reason God set it up the way that He did, and it's vital that we live by the teaching of our parents that raised us according to Scripture, and that we take that, we live it out, and we pass it on. Allow me to close with these words. I want to ask our young people especially to listen closely. I gave you life, but I cannot live it for you. I can teach you things, but I cannot make you learn. I can give you directions, but I cannot always be there to lead you. I can allow you freedom, but I cannot account for it. I can take you to church, but I cannot make you believe. I can teach you right from wrong, but I can't always decide for you. I can buy you beautiful clothes, but I cannot make you lovely inside. I can offer you advice, but I cannot accept it for you. I can give you love, but I cannot force it upon you. I can teach you to be a friend, but I cannot make you one. I can teach you to share, but I cannot make you unselfish. I can teach you respect, but I can't force you to show honor. I can grieve about your report card, but I cannot doubt your teachers. I can advise you about friends, but I cannot choose them for you. I can teach you about sex, but I cannot keep you pure. I can tell you the facts of life, but I can't build your reputation. I can tell you about drink, but I can't say no for you. I can warn you about drugs, but I can't prevent you from using them. I can tell you about lofty goals, but I can't achieve them for you. I can teach you kindness, but I can't force you to be gracious. I can warn you about sins, but I can't make you moral. I can love you as a daughter or a son, but I cannot place you in God's family. I can pray for you, but I cannot make you walk with God. I can teach you about Jesus, but I cannot make Him your Savior. I can teach you to obey, but I cannot make Jesus your Lord. I can tell you how to live, but I cannot give you eternal life. It's my hope and prayer that all of us, children and parents alike, will seek to live out the plan that God has expressed in His written word. That we will do our duty and our due diligence as parents and as children to live by that plan. Parents have a responsibility, but children do as well. And when we're all on the same page, we form a team that is impenetrable and that keeps the devil away. It's a fortress of solitude that no one can penetrate. Maybe you're sitting here this morning and maybe you're dealing with unfaithfulness. Maybe you're someone that needs to recommit their life to Christ. You need the prayers, support of this church family. We'd love to pray with you, to help you to get back on track. And perhaps you are a child of God. Perhaps you put on Christ in baptism some time ago. Perhaps you're feeling the weight of guilt because your parents raised you correctly and you're not living in that way. Maybe you're a parent that's struggling with guilt. Or maybe you're not a child of God and maybe you've thought about it and you need to put on Christ in baptism this morning. Certainly, we want to take care of that as well. Let us live according to God's plan. If you have a need, come to us now as we stand and as we sing. Story, how a Savior came from